Thank you, Ms. Yuan. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to first thank Simba and thank the sponsors for inviting me to speak here today. As it's the session straight after lunch, the first thing I'm going to get you to do is to wake you up, is to get you to do some work. Now, you're all sitting on long tables, and each table is going to be a team. It doesn't matter if there's 2 of you or 12 of you. So each table is a team, so I'd like you to get to know your other table delegates, the other delegates on your table. In the middle of your table, there is a sheet of paper, and you're going to have to stand up and gather around that sheet of paper, and I'm going to get you drawing, getting you to draw something. And what I'm going to get you to draw, so if you can just now stand and move into the center of the table. So on every table, there's a sheet of paper. Okay? So you have to move around and join as a group and introduce yourselves to each other on your table. On that sheet of paper, why is this not working? On that sheet of paper, you need to draw a pentagram. Like this. And then on each axis, I want you to mark it off from 0 to 5. And then, as a team, you need to choose one brand. You're going to represent that brand. So I need you as a team to imagine that you are working for a well-known brand. It can be any kind of brand, perhaps not just food and beverage, maybe any brand really, any consumer-facing brand. And I'd like you to write your brand here. Okay? And then across the top, sight or vision, sound, touch, smell, and taste. Okay? So have you decided which brand you're going to be? And then what I need you to do is, as a team, decide how well the brand that you represent scores itself from 0, very badly, to 5, as good as it possibly could be, in terms of the impact that it has on consumers across each sense. And that impact is both in the communications, but in the product experience as well. So if a brand impacts on consumers and makes a really strong and positive visual impact, stronger than anything else in the world, as strong as it possibly could be, you would score it at 5. If your brand has no sound whatsoever, either in the product experience or in the communications, score it as 0. So as a team, I'm going to give you 5 minutes, that's all, just 5 minutes, to discuss amongst yourselves and to score your brand from 1 to 6. And when you've scored it, just put a little cross on the axis, wherever it may be. Okay? You have 5 minutes. Okay, I think your time's up. Thank you very much for doing that. I hope you found it not too difficult. It is, of course, entirely subjective. Oh, just to finish, what you need, some of you, I think, have realized. Just join up your marks wherever they may be. And of course, this is entirely subjective, but it is some kind of an idea of the sensory footprint of that brand. What I'm going to do now is just ask 2 teams, someone from that team to come to the front and explain to everyone what brand they've chosen and why they've scored it as they have. Can I have someone from the polo team, please? just to come to the front and share with everyone why you've scored it as you have. Thank you. Yeah, I'll hold it. Oh, thank you.
So I'm going to speak Chinese. It's okay. 然后我们选的产品是 Polo。
We actually chose Polo, Polo brand. Everybody's got that brand on the mint on your table. Well, first of all, the sight dimension is quite clear cut. You know, it's round shaped, white colored, and on all of its ads or branding, this color, this shape was highlighted. And I remember the TV ad, we put it in sprites, I remember. So the color and the shape was very highlighted. That's why we gave it 5 as the score. And then sound. Sound, well, it's a sugar. It's a candy. And it doesn't produce any sound, not even whistling sound. So it's cannot be used as a whistle. So very low mark. And in terms of its touch, I think it's visually overwhelming. So the touch part was also overwhelmed. And in terms of smell is also, well, significantly smaller than that of taste, because it's got very strong mint taste. But the mint taste is not as strong as 5 in our view. It might be a mild mint. That's why it's not strong. So in terms of taste, we gave it a score lower than 5. So it stands out in sight and in taste, but anything else is not as good. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Just one more team. Well, let's try the Red Bull team. I'm going to pick on them.
Change the format. Thank you. Once again. No. That's not holding.
I'll hold it.
Okay. Could you please hold it? We described the product Red Bull energy drink in a can, 250 ml can. And when you start to consume the product, you should hear a typical sound, the opening of the can. So we marked the sound as a 2 because cans are quite common, but for the total experience of a Red Bull can, even the opening, the typical click of a metal can is very important. And so the can is the icon of our brand, so we think that the sound has some significance. The touch, we think a cold can in your hand is quite refreshing before you even start to drink. So we should consider also that Red Bull is very much available in refrigerated offerings near the cash desk, so you can really enjoy the coldness of this can. So touch is also a very significant thing for this brand. The smell and the taste. Years ago, energy drinks had a quite unique smell and taste. So this is quite significant for the whole category. So the taste is really scored up to 4.5. Smell a little bit lower, but after opening, you should even get the first impression of the smell of the product even before you start to drink it. The sight, of course, iconic branding, which should be well known, it should be eye-catching. So the sight of this is also a very good ambassador in the shelves for this brand, Red Bull. Thank you.
Thank you for that. At the end, we might have time to look at those again. But I urge you to go back to your companies and just think about the impact that your brands are making across all 5 senses, which is what I'm here to talk about. I'm a multi-sensory branding consultant. And this doesn't seem to be... I started this job about 20 years ago. I was working as a brand manager for a computing company, and it was terribly dull, the job. It was very boring, because all I was doing was producing price lists, all about the rational reasons that someone would want to buy. And I went to my managing director at the time and I said, no one really cares about how big the hard drive is. What they believe in is the brand. I got fired. So I set up the company called the Aroma Company, which was primarily responsible from 1993 about looking at new ways that brands could communicate with consumers. And I was really interested in the sense of smell. But to start with, I did some research, and I found out some really interesting things, such as this. This number is actually the number of TV adverts an average child in our modern world will see or be exposed to every single year of their life. And by the time that child has reached the age of 65, by the time they've retired, they will have seen 2 million TV adverts. And if you think of the average length of the average TV advert, that equates to 8 hours each day for 7 days a week for 6 years of that child's life being exposed to TV advertising. Astounding. Is it any wonder, therefore, that the ability to remember what we see, and this is the same on the internet, is plummeting? The more we are exposed to visual messages, the more we suffer from visual overload. And I know a lot of the talk today is about, how your brand should be communicating online, and of course it should, but it also needs to be thinking about its impact across other senses, which is what I'm here to talk about. In fact, daily messaging, broadcast media messages have increased by 400% over the last 20 years or so. And 83% of all brand communications is visual. If you think of that pentagram that you've just drawn, that vertical axis is responsible for 83% of all brand communications. And there is a problem with this, because the way the brain works is that the visual communication goes to the cortex, which is the rational part of our brain, and we can misinterpret that which we are seeing. I'm going to play a little video now. If you've seen this before, I'd ask you just to keep quiet. But those of you who haven't seen it before, what I would like you to do is focus on the team wearing white, and they're playing basketball, and they're passing the ball between themselves. And I'd like you to count how many times they pass the ball between themselves, okay? So may I ask how many times they passed the basketball? Anyone say? 19, 17, 18, 19, something like that. For those of you who haven't seen it before, did you notice anything unusual? A gorilla. Did anyone not notice the gorilla? I certainly didn't the first time I saw this. You can be honest. Did anybody not see the gorilla? A few of you. I can see about maybe a quarter, half of you. If we could just very quickly run the video again, please. Now, the reason you missed that, it's called inattentive blindness. I gave you a task to do, and you were focused on the task. You missed the fairly obvious gorilla. I did too. It's nothing, no shame. It's because your sense of sight is processed by the rational part of our brain called the cortex. And I'll just give you another example. These should run.
Here's our little dragon.
These should run
sitting
as they
on
are.
the window ledge.
Okay. These should just run in PowerPoint.
But look what happens the minute we move. His head twists and turns to follow us as we move around the room.
Let's move
All
on.
an illusion, of course. He's not really moving at all. It's a version of the hollow face illusion, but it's a very powerful effect. Dragon, sitting on the window ledge.
research that we did when I formed the Business Brand Sense Academy in 2006 looked at how how consumers consumed branded messages, so the thing that we've seen earlier. And what we found is that the senses were very much in balance. So consumers rated sight obviously as very important, but look how the other senses were in balance. And yet we also asked marketing directors of Fortune 500 companies how they spent their marketing budget. And you can see there's a huge imbalance here. Smell, touch, and taste only accounted for about 4% of marketing budgets. And yet look at how the senses were in balance in terms of what consumers, how they related to the brands that they love, which is represented by this. So here is the opportunity. This is what I help brands to do. And why is this important? This is because brands are largely an emotional response. When we respond to a brand, it is emotional. In fact, various research reveals that about 70% of our relationship with brands is emotional, which can be represented like this. If you think of our relationship with brands from a rational to an emotional, or from what we're aware of to what we're not even thinking about, I think most research points to the fact that this is an emotional and an unconscious relationship. And if you don't believe me, here are 4 executive saloon cars. And here are all the rational reasons why you might choose one saloon car over another. And I'd ask you, just by looking at all this rational product information, to choose one of those cars. It's pretty difficult, isn't it? But if I do this, suddenly that choice becomes much easier. And this is the emotional reason why we choose one brand over another. I know which I'd buy and I know which I probably wouldn't. And it's very easy because of all the emotional equity that those brand logos represent. And there is another way of thinking about this. And I'd like you to imagine that you're single and that you're at a party. And let's be honest, if you're at a party and you're single, you're going to be looking around the room to see someone who might be attractive. And if you see someone who's attractive, you might have a drink of glass of wine and you might pluck up the courage to go and talk to them. And over the course of the evening, as you're talking to them, you might start to build up a bit of a rapport. You might think they're quite nice. They might think you're quite nice. And it's going quite well. And maybe the music's quietening down and the soft music comes on. And you put your arm around them. You go onto the dance floor. You start dancing. And you're coming up close and personal now. And you might then smell their wonderful fragrance. Some of you are ahead of me here. And if the evening's gone really well, at the end of the evening, you might get, I'm talking kiss. You might get to kiss them. And for me, this is a spiral in towards human relationship and what I would call intimacy. And this is our human relationships. It's that spiral in towards intimacy. But you know what? The really interesting thing is that spiral in towards intimacy is exactly the same as our relationship towards brands. And the most intimate part of our relationship with humans actually equates to the food and beverage industry. It's here. This is where the food and beverage industry can steal a march on many other brands. You certainly can't taste, a Lexus or a BMW. So you have a unique opportunity to be intimate with your consumers, which, forgive me, most of our online communication can't really do. So it's something you need to be thinking about. And so my job as a sensory branding consultant is to identify those sensory elements on that journey in towards intimacy and populate that spiral of intimacy with sensory brand attributes that you as a brand can own. Why is this important? I'll give you a few examples. In 1915, the brief that went from the Coca-Cola company to their packaging suppliers was that they wanted a bottle that if it was dropped on the floor and broke into 100 pieces, you'd be able to pick up one of those pieces and still recognize it as a Coke bottle. Apparently, anecdotally, it was so that a bartender could put their hand into an ice box and pull out the Coke bottle. So it got us thinking, if you smashed your brand into 100 pieces and you took away the logo, what's left? Is it a shape? Is it a color? Is it a sound? Is it a smell? Is it iconography, rituals, language, name? What is it your brand can own? And I'll give you a few examples. Can anyone name this brand? Is it smashable? Can anyone name the brand? Apple, yeah? From the white headphones, it's just Apple. That use, that consistent use of white in their technology became a smashable part of their brand attribute. This brand, it's so iconically recognized. This is actually in Chicago, and they've literally smashed the arches. And as you drive past, the arches form. Smashable identity. What about this brand? Can anyone recognize the smashable brand here? It's hidden. It's actually Absolute Vodka. And that was a poster on the freeway coming into New York. And that's all you saw. And yet it was immediately smashable. It was immediately identifiable. What about this brand? Welcome to our kingdom, the place where creativity and magic and fantasy, creativity and fantasy go hand in hand, spreading smiles and magic at every generation. Can anyone name the brand? Disney. The smashable use of language. If you go visit any one of the Disney attractions in the world, the Mouseketeers, as they're called, have to use these words in their interaction with guests. They have to use magic, family, smiles, and generations.
When you wish upon a star, makes no difference who you are, anything you're.
And what can be more smashable than that piece of music, which takes us back to our happy childhood memories and has become so closely associated with that brand? A great example of sonic sound branding. Again, clearly identified. This would be a completely invisible brand if it weren't for that sound. They actually co-sponsored a whole range of TV adverts with PC manufacturers. Without that sound, invisible. If you're a PC user like I am, the danger is that sound actually becomes associated with the fact that your PC has just crashed again. If you're an Apple user, you can sit there and look smug. What about this brand? Can anyone name this brand? I think someone said Tiffany. That was probably a woman. For you men in the room, you can get empty Tiffany boxes on eBay for $50. So come Valentine's Day or birthdays, that's just a little tip. And this brand, the smell is uniquely identified anywhere in the world. Smashable smell. Here's just an example of another brand that someone was looking at. Without the logo, this is just a coffee cup. Without the logo, it's pretty impossible to tell the brand, but if you guessed, you were probably right, the market leader probably. But not particularly smashable. You know, you walk into a Starbucks, apart from the logo over the door, you could be any other coffee shop. Here's a small coffee shop, actually in London, but they're doing things very differently. They are owning the sense of humor. And they don't have a particularly strong brand image, but they own humor, and this is the sort of thing that you see. Sprinkle onto the shoulders of your enemy for their sugar. Serving suggestion, pour in cup coffee and shut up. Stupid little biscuit. And if you go to their head office, this is their meeting room, their head office meeting room and their boardroom. So they've really taken this idea of owning humor to heart. So my question to you, what is it that your company owns? What are the sensory signals that you own? What would you like to own? Identify 2 or 3. Push them to the extreme. Make sure that you secure an ownership and research that ownership and be patient, it takes time. Why is this important? and I know there are going to be some speakers about neuroscience in a minute. A few years ago, I was presenting like this in Paris, and I was talking about McDonald's and how bad the McDonald's smell was. I didn't know that the McDonald's marketing director was in the audience. And he came up to me afterwards and he said, "Simon, you're absolutely right. We know we have a problem with the sense of smell. Can you help us? Can you turn that bad smell into a neutral?" And I said to him, "Look, you know what? I think we can do better than that. I think we can take your brand values and create a fragrance, a McDonald's signature fragrance, that you could put in your cleaning products. So when you mop the floors or clean the tables, that smell will become associated with the McDonald's brand experience." And so we did just that. But what we did was we created the fragrance and we did some research. And the first thing we needed to find out is whether McDonald's consumers associated that fragrance with the McDonald's brand values, which were good food, fast, fresh, family, and fun. And the consumer research proved the inherent link between that fragrance and those brand values. But what we then wanted to do is try and understand the emotional response that we got. And we put consumers in a brain scanner using fMRI, functional magnetic resonance imaging. And we introduced the McDonald's consumers to McDonald's pictures. And what we saw was the brain lighting up. You could measure the emotional response, and let's call it X. Then separately, we put those same consumers in the scanner and we introduced the signature fragrance that we had created. And the amazing thing is that we saw exactly the same parts of the brain light up to exactly the same extent. Fascinating. Then what we did is we put the consumers back in the scanner and we introduced the smell and the image together. And it was like fireworks going off in the brain. The emotional response was multiplied. It was synergistic, what the psychologists called super additive. So for sensory communication, the more senses you add, and the stronger your pentagram becomes, you're actually multiplying the emotional engagement. Where have I put the... We also did some research for the National Postal Service of England, and they wanted to look at direct mail. Interesting for the people who are from the printing companies here. And we took a piece of branded communication, a visual piece of communication, and we printed it on a piece of paper, and we put it onto a digital screen. And we introduced consumers to the scanner, and we scanned their emotional response both to the piece of paper and the exact same image and message on a digital screen. And this is what we found. Because the paper had a sense of place, you were touching it, and it had a relationship with your body, the words and pictures on the piece of paper were much more real than on a digital screen. There was more emotional response to the piece of paper. You can see some of the results here. It was more real, it was more emotionally engaging, and it was more memorable. And I think this has huge and significant impact on our marketing mix and our channel and our media choice. So just bear that in mind too. Time's moving on. So what I do is I have a process, and really what my job is I coach brands to think about this more holistically, and we have a process that we go through, and it involves workshops and coaching to transfer this knowledge and these ideas into your business. And we use tools to do that. And then it's about sort of implementation. And these are some of the typical results that actually communicating through smell, for example, will bring at point of sale. We can create brand switch, we can drive sales uplift. And the interesting thing is when you're engaging with consumers on the sense of smell, because it goes to the emotional center of the brain, it bypasses our rational, our cortex. You're engaging them emotionally. It drives brand loyalty, not just short-term sales uplift, but long-term brand loyalty. You remember this brand intimacy. You're creating brand intimacy by using these intimate senses. I probably haven't got time to do this case study now, but what we might do is for the next 2 or 3 minutes, I'd like you to revisit your sensogram as a group, and with this new knowledge, just discuss if you would score your brand slightly differently. So you've got 2 or 3 minutes to do that, and then we'll wrap up. Thank you. So if you go back to your sensorgrams as a group, and then just redraw and discuss where you might rescore them with these ideas in mind. I'll leave you to look at that in the break, in the coffee break, but it gives you some food for thought. So I just wanted to thank you very much for your involvement. I think is there time for a few questions, if anyone has any questions or comments? Please do come and see me afterwards between the break, but thank you.